On live national television, the confident swagger and triumphant grin that Donald Trump carried onto the stage vanished. The moment Jimmy Kimmel calmly introduced the long-buried comments Trump had once made about his own daughter, Ivanka, and the studio fell into a stunned silence that lasted until Kimmel delivered the real gut punch. Every sickening word had come straight from Trump's own mouth, captured on tape, video, and sworn testimony, turning what had begun as a proud dad moment into the most humiliating public confrontation of the night. This was no ordinary late-night episode. It was a rare, high-stakes sit-down with the sitting president walking straight into what many considered enemy territory. The studio audience split down the middle, one half packed with red-hatted supporters buzzing with energy and ready to cheer, the other half filled with skeptics and critics, arms crossed, eyes sharp, waiting for fireworks. Kimmel stepped out from behind the curtain with his usual calm, easy smile, yet something colder sat behind it tonight. He waved once and the room exploded into a mixture of roaring cheers and loud boos that crashed together like two rival teams at a playoff game. Trump strode out like he owned the building, shoulders back, chin high, the famous grin flashing under the bright lights. The two men met in the middle of the stage, shook hands. Trump's grip firm and testing, Kimmel's squeeze harder, and Kimmel leaned in close enough for only Trump to hear the quiet warning, "Tonight's going to be different." Trump's grin did not flicker, but his eyes sharpened for half a second before they both sat. The band cut out, the lights tightened on the two chairs, and Kimmel opened with a straightforward question about a fresh poll of 10,000 viewers showing 72% under more financial stress than the year before. Trump laughed it off, insisting the economy was the best in history, lowest unemployment, wages rising, jobs returning, and his supporters erupted while Kimmel simply reached under the desk, produced a single sheet of paper on White House letterhead, and read a confidential memo from the president's own economic team noting persistent inflation pressures and supply chain disruptions that continue to impact middle-class households disproportionately. The studio went dead quiet, then exploded. Trump's grin vanished, his neck turned red, and he shot halfway out of his chair shouting that the memo was a total forgery and classic fake news, while half the audience roared in agreement and the other half demanded the whole document be shown. Kimmel remained seated, calm, holding the paper steady and inviting the economic team to appear the next day to disprove it. But Trump doubled down on record jobs and energy independence until Kimmel brought on a live call from a former economic office staffer who confirmed he had helped draft the memo and that the hardship was real. The studio erupted again. Trump accused the caller of being a deep state plant, and the noise turned chaotic, cheers and boos colliding, until Trump suddenly pivoted, voice softening, and declared that family was his favorite topic, and that Ivanka was fantastic, smart, strong, beautiful, doing incredible work, raising 3 children, tough like her old man. For nearly 30 seconds, the studio felt almost cozy. Light applause rolled through. The earlier shouting died down, and people settled in thinking the rough part of the night might finally be over. Jimmy Kimmel let Trump speak about Ivanka without interruption, nodding along and giving the president all the space he wanted. Until the warm glow in the room vanished the instant Kimmel leaned forward, voice dropping lower and more serious, and said quietly that family is everything, which is why he had to ask about something Trump himself had once said about his own daughter. The proud dad expression on Trump's face froze. The audience went still, every eye locked on the two men as the air thickened like the moment before a storm. Trump still smiled, but the smile looked tighter. He waved a hand casually and told Kimmel to ask anything because he had nothing to hide. Then Kimmel looked straight at him and delivered the words slowly and clearly, so every syllable landed like a hammer. "Your daughter, Ivanka, piece of ass." Studio froze into pure shock, mouths hung open. Phones slipped and clattered onto the floor. Trump's smile disappeared in half a heartbeat. His eyes widened, then narrowed. His face turned bright red. He shot up out of his chair so hard it scraped loudly against the stage and barked, "What did you just say?" pointing a shaking finger at Kimmel and declaring that no one crosses that line. Corroded into gasps and whispers, some covered their mouths, nervous laughs died instantly. The red hat section looked stunned, while the rest stared wide-eyed. Trump took a step forward, chest heaving, calling the remark disgusting, while Kimmel remained seated, hands easy on the desk, and answered calmly that he had not said it. Those were Trump's own words from a 1990s radio interview. The big screen flickered to life with unedited audio, a host's voice noting that Ivanka was growing up fast and turning into quite a piece of ass, followed by Trump's younger but unmistakable reply that she was something, and that if she weren't his daughter, maybe he'd be dating her, accompanied by casual laughter from the old studio audience. A deep collective groan rolled through the crowd. People winced. Trump stood frozen, then exploded again, claiming the clip was out of context, cherry-picked, and twisted. Kimmel brought on the original radio host live, who confirmed the words had been spoken exactly that way and that everyone had laughed at the time. Chaos surged, people yelled over each other, phones recorded everything. Kimmel pressed forward without raising his voice and played a 2006 television clip in which Trump, seated beside Ivanka on a morning show couch, repeated the same line almost word for word. "I've said that if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her," and laughed heartily while Ivanka smiled politely and looked down. The studio reaction was worse. A loud groan turned into shouts of, "Oh my God," a woman stood and yelled, "That's your daughter," before security eased her down. Phones shot up everywhere. Trump slammed his fist on the desk, face purple, calling it a hit job and a setup, insisting it had been a joke and a compliment that people understood back then. Kimmel produced a sworn statement from the producer of that 2006 show, confirming Trump had made the comment multiple times before the cameras rolled and that the crew had been told to keep rolling. Gasps mixed with louder boos. Trump spun toward the audience, declaring a witch hunt and election interference. But the cheers from his side were already being swallowed by the growing outrage from the rest of the room. Jimmy Kimmel let the noise settle for only a second before announcing there was more. Leaked audio from 2023 of a woman who had worked inside Trump's inner circle, describing multiple occasions on which the president made inappropriate comments about Ivanka's body in front of staff, telling them to laugh it off and never repeat it. A deep groan rolled through the crowd. People winced. Phones rose again. Trump lunged toward the screen, shouting that the voice was a fabrication and a paid-off liar. Kimmel brought the woman on live, voice only for her protection. She stated she had heard the remarks 3 specific times, once in the Oval Office, once on Air Force One, and once at a private dinner, and that anyone who looked uncomfortable was made to understand that laughing was required or they would be fired. The studio erupted. Loud boos crashed through the seats. Someone shouted, "That's your daughter." The outrage was raw and no longer neatly split. Trump paced behind his chair, hands beginning to tremble, muttering about betrayal by his own people, while the thin cheers from his remaining supporters were drowned by the weight of the room. Kimmel next introduced Dr. Elena Ramirez, a forensic media analyst who examined the 1990s radio audio, the 2006 television footage, and the 2023 recording, and concluded that none showed signs of AI synthesis or digital manipulation. The radio clip matched analog tape archives. The television footage was standard definition network material with clean spectrograms, and the 2023 audio carried verified iPhone metadata and chain of custody. Trump accused her of bias and of being paid, but his voice no longer carried the same force. Kimmel produced 2 additional sworn affidavits signed that very morning by former staffers from 2012 and 2018, each recounting nearly identical comments about Ivanka having the best body or the best figure in the family, and the instruction to treat the remarks as jokes. Sharp gasps and louder boos followed. Trump began insisting everything was AI and deep fakes, pacing like a caged animal. But even some earlier supporters now looked uncertain. He pulled out his phone and announced he was calling Ivanka live so she could declare the whole thing fake. The phone rang 3 times with no answer. Then the studio monitor flashed an internal email from Ivanka's team, time-stamped only minutes earlier, stating she would not comment or defend the statements publicly and wanted no part of the fallout. Jimmy read the email aloud. The room exploded. Trump stood completely still, phone still in his hand, shoulders dropping, eyes glistening with a mixture of anger and something deeper. He roared that the lies and setups would not stand, jabbed a finger at Kimmel one last time, then spun and stormed off stage, slamming the side door so hard the crack echoed through the microphones, leaving the chair opposite Kimmel empty under the spotlight. Pandemonium broke loose, half the crowd cheering, half booing, phones flashing, while Kimmel remained seated for a moment, then stood, walked to the front of the stage, and observed in a deadpan voice that when the evidence got too real, the new go-to line was "AI did it," adding that next time someone would probably blame the moon landing. He glanced at the empty chair and said quietly that sometimes the truth leaves an empty chair. A final sheet of paper appeared, a public petition signed by 12 former staffers and witnesses confirming the comments in the pattern, already trending. The entire audience rose in a long standing ovation. The side door cracked open once more. Trump leaned halfway in, face still red, and shouted that Kimmel had only humiliated himself and that the real truth was coming. Kimmel simply pointed silently at the empty chair. Trump stared, found no comeback, and the door closed for good. Kimmel walked back to center stage, thanked the audience, and said goodnight while the lights dimmed and the band swelled. The image that remained was the single empty chair under the spotlight, silent and louder than any rant. Backstage, clips were already exploding online. A producer texted that more internal emails from Ivanka's circle were expected the next day. Outside, the internet burned with the night's hashtags, and the confrontation that had begun with a confident walk-on had ended with an empty chair and a country still arguing over the words that had filled it. The empty chair under the spotlight remained the dominant image long after the studio lights dimmed, and the band finished its soft closing theme, yet the confrontation did not end when the cameras cut. Within minutes, the backstage corridors filled with producers, security, and network executives scrambling to manage the flood of incoming calls while Jimmy Kimmel sat alone in his dressing room watching the first wave of online reaction crest in real time. Clips of Trump's exit already accumulating millions of views, and the hashtag pairing the host's name with the phrase, "empty chair," climbing every major platform. A producer knocked and entered carrying a fresh stack of printouts explaining that 3 more former staffers had contacted the show's tip line during the final commercial break, each offering independent corroboration of the same pattern of remarks and each insisting on remaining anonymous for now, but willing to sign sworn statements under seal if the network would protect their identities. Kimmel scanned the summaries, noted the consistency of language across different years and settings, and instructed the legal team to begin the formal process of securing the affidavits while the social media team prepared a measured follow-up post that simply linked the verified archival clips without additional commentary. A growing crowd of both supporters and critics had already gathered, some chanting slogans, others holding phones high to stream the unfolding chaos, and the first cable news crawls began describing the night as the most explosive late-night exchange in years. Inside the network control room, analysts tracked the rapid shift in sentiment metrics, watching approval numbers among independent viewers drop sharply in the minutes after Trump's departure, while engagement metrics on the unedited audio and video segments soared past previous records for the show. Kimmel received a second text from the same producer who had earlier flagged Ivanka's internal email. This one reported that additional correspondence from her team was expected by morning, and that a separate legal inquiry had already been opened by at least one of the former staffers regarding non-disclosure agreements that had been used to silence discussion of the comments. Meanwhile, Trump's motorcade, according to pool reports, had left the studio under tight security and headed toward a private residence rather than the planned post-show rally stop, the change in itinerary itself becoming immediate fodder for speculation. On social media, the debate fractured along predictable lines, yet also produced unexpected crossovers. Some longtime supporters posted that the clips were old and taken out of context, while others admitted discomfort at hearing the words again in such concentrated form. Critics circulated side-by-side comparisons of the 1990s radio audio, the 2006 television appearance, and the 2023 leaked recording of phrasing across 3 decades. Network affiliates reported spikes in viewer complaints and simultaneous spikes in viewer praise, forcing affiliate managers to issue carefully worded statements that the program had aired verified public record material and that the decision to present it had been made after extensive legal review. By the following morning, the empty chair image had been freeze-framed on front pages and morning show openers, accompanied by panels of commentators debating whether the confrontation crossed a line or simply held a public figure accountable for his own recorded words. One former White House communications official, speaking on background, confirmed that the internal guidance after previous resurfacings of the comments had always been to dismiss them as outdated locker room talk and move on, a strategy that had worked in quieter media cycles, but proved insufficient against the combination of live television, simultaneous archival playback, and real-time whistleblower participation. Another former staffer, this one willing to speak on camera under her own name, appeared on a competing morning program and stated that the atmosphere surrounding such remarks had created a culture in which discomfort was treated as disloyalty, exactly as the anonymous 2023 Voice had described. Legal analysts noted that while the original comments themselves remained protected speech, the pattern of subsequent private repetitions and the alleged pressure on staff to remain silent could invite separate scrutiny if corroborated by additional sworn testimony. Kimmel's team, meanwhile, prepared a concise public statement reaffirming that every clip and document presented on air had been authenticated prior to broadcast, and that the show stood by its reporting. The statement deliberately avoided gloating and focused instead on the principle that public figures' own recorded words belong in the public record. By midday, the petition mentioned at the end of the broadcast had surpassed 100,000 signatures, and several of the original 12 signatories had granted follow-up interviews confirming the accuracy of their accounts. Trump's own social media channels issued a series of posts labeling the entire episode a coordinated ambush and promising major revelations in the coming days. Yet the promised counter-evidence had not materialized by the time evening newscasts began. Inside the network, executives debated whether to devote a full follow-up segment the next night or to allow the story to develop organically. Kimmel argued for a measured approach that would present any new verified material without turning the show into a nightly tribunal. As the first full news cycle closed, the dominant visual remained that single empty chair under the studio spotlight, an image that required no narration and that continued to circulate more widely than any of the verbal defenses offered in its wake, leaving the public to decide for itself what the sudden departure and the unanswered phone call ultimately signified.